You're giving me a countdown. I can't see it. I'm gonna have like, all right. My name is Mayor. My name is Mayor Kamal Johnson, and I'm here to welcome everyone to another virtual town hall. I want to thank Hudson Hall, Future Hudson, Columbia Economic Development Corporation, the Spark of Hudson, Design for 6 Feet, and Martin Audiovisual Services for pitching in on this latest exciting proposal. I also want to thank everyone for doing their part during COVID-19 and staying inside, wearing masks, washing your hands. We did have some people in our community that we lost, unfortunately, and we had some that were sick, but Hudson managed to miss the huge spread, and I'm grateful for that. We're not out of the water yet, so let's continue to practice our social distancing guidelines. Now I want to introduce everyone to Tambra Dillon from the Hudson Hall, who will start off our presentation this afternoon.
Thank you, Mayor Kamal Johnson, and I want to just first of all thank you for giving us the opportunity to create a shared and inclusive vision. In addition to those that you've already thanked, I want to send a special thank you to all of your department heads and chiefs. Every single department of the city has been an amazing resource for us in developing what has been an epic few weeks to develop this plan. And that includes the city's attorneys, the police, the fire, EMS, DPW, code enforcement, Department of Youth, as well as outside of the city, the Columbia County Department of Health. They've been tremendous, enthusiastic supporters and incredibly helpful. I too want to thank Peter for his tireless efforts on this project, and you've done so much community outreach and also for putting together the funding we
I think we lost her sound. Maybe unmute
Tamra. I think I keep getting muted. Can everyone hear me now? Anyways, in addition to every agency in the city that's been tremendous, I wanted to thank Peter Spear for your tireless efforts and all of the community outreach that you've done, and for raising the funds from the Spark of Hudson and Columbia Economic Development Corporation to bring Kaya Cool and her team on board. Kaya, Trisha, Nina, you've been amazing, and it's been an inspiration. The whole goal of this presentation is to get your feedback, it's been an accelerated process due to the accelerated timetable for Hudson's reopening, and I know everyone has been scrambling. So we are working really hard to develop a plan so we can safely reopen the city and reconnect with each other in the community. We're also really grateful to the numerous members of the Hudson Business Coalition that have given us input, the HDC Emergency Task Force committees, and the tremendous support we've received from so many community groups. And not least, I'd like to thank our general manager, Sage Carter, who's been a rock to work with, and also a very, very special thanks to the Common Council. So anyways, I'd like to hand it over to Kaya, who directs the Hudson Valley Initiative at Columbia University's Graduate School of Architecture, Planning and Preservation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tammy, and thank you everyone for joining this virtual town hall and listening in. Thank you for including us in this amazing plan. So some of you may remember me from 2 years ago. We worked with Friends of Oakdale to develop a vision for Oakdale Lake. And now we're really happy to be back in Hudson. When a few weeks ago, we started to look at ideas around the world, really, what cities are doing in order to respond to the pandemic and the ways in which they change public space. And so when I spoke to Peter about this, he invited us to help participate in this process to envision how Hudson could use its public space to really expand and enhance it for residents, businesses, community organizations to safely reopen and reconnect with each other this summer. We've all learned that being outside is the safest place we can be these days. And so without further ado, I want to share with you a couple of strategies that we've developed really in enormous speed over the last 10 days or so. And we're looking forward for feedback and input from all of you who are listening in. You can post your questions and comments throughout the presentation and even after the presentation, and we will do our best to respond to them. And so I want to start with an overview of 3 strategies that we've developed. The first one, and I will go into detail for each one of them with a few images. The first one is to allow businesses and organizations over the course of the summer to occupy on-street parking in Hudson, adapting existing permitting processes to make it easy to do so. This would be 24/7 for the duration of the shared summer street program. And our goal is to include and encourage businesses and organizations that are currently not present on Warren Street to also participate. The second strategy, and again, I will explain in more detail, is the idea of a shared street concept where from Friday to Sunday, from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m., we propose that select streets or sections of streets are open to local traffic only and to pedestrians in order to make this sort of opening up and being in public space safer for everybody and just increase the space in which people can walk. And then the third strategy is to add to this plan public picnic and activity areas on properties that are abutting these shared streets that can be open for public use, for picnic and for light cultural activities. Here's an overview of the areas that we envision this can happen, and we will refine where exactly this happens over the course of the next weeks and maybe the course of the entire summer. So in pink, you see the area that we envision this shared street concept to take effect. But the idea that on-street parking can be occupied can grow beyond these areas in pink. And I want to start with that actually as more visuals to sort of explain what we mean by that. So what you're seeing here are businesses and activities that move from the inside that are often very small in these buildings along Warren Street and other streets in Hudson onto the parking lots. That could be vending, it could be restaurants. The goal is that the organizations and businesses that take advantage of this would be responsible for all the equipment and furnishing that they bring out onto the street. They would be responsible for the maintenance of these places and also for certain aspects of safety. So creating some sort of barrier between the business space and the street itself. And then here's a slide of an overview of what this would look like, and with dimensions. On the left, you see Warren Street as it exists today. The sidewalks are approximately 10 feet. The parking lanes are about 8 feet, and then there are 2 lanes of traffic. And then what we envision would happen is that businesses who elect to do so, or nonprofits who elect to do so, could take up the parking space. The sidewalk would have to remain at least a minimum of, we think, 6 feet of a clear path for pedestrians. So there's a little bit of room also to bring things onto the sidewalk. And then what you can see here also is that in spaces where this doesn't happen, cars could continue to park in these parking spaces. And then we wanted to give you one example of a block between 3rd and 4th Street to also sort of highlight the idea that this isn't only for businesses, that this is an opportunity for organizations to participate in this shared summer streets program. This block contains a number of properties that are occupied by nonprofit organizations and city-owned properties. And so we think that there's an opportunity that the spaces in front of these buildings could be occupied and programmed with tables by, you know, either the youth department, which is just south of that municipal parking lot, or by other organizations who are already present there or have relationships with the nonprofits that are on these lots. And so this can become a mix of uses along Warren Street and Front Street, where lots of different actors in Hudson can occupy the spaces. Here's some images and examples of the kind of collection that I mentioned at the beginning, where we've just looked at very simple improvements of these parking spaces. One thing that I think we want to impress on everybody is that this isn't a plan that starts with the perfect and expensive design solution, but the idea is that these things can be tested and evolve over time. And so in an initial rollout, maybe, you know, either businesses or organizations start with very simple measures that make the spaces safe and usable, and then can be sort of tested and improved over time, and can really occupy these spaces in a variety of forms, be it for dining or, you know, kids programming or just simply seating. And then I want to go into the second part of the strategy with this, which is this concept of a shared street. And here are some examples of shared streets from all over the world. The one on the left is an image of a top left is an image of a permanent street. There are many of those in Europe, and you can see on the picture how cars, cafes, bicycles, pedestrians all share the same space and do so safely. And then a lot of the other images are actually quite recent and are sort of very improvised responses to the pandemic, allowing more space for pedestrians by asking cars to drive no faster than pedestrian speed, 5 miles an hour. The top right is an image that indicates sort of very similar to what we're trying to do in Hudson, you know, to close the street to through traffic in order to help local businesses get back on their feet. And then on the bottom left, I want to point this one out is, you know, the city of Portland in Oregon is already sort of making first steps to planning, you know, turning the next step and planning what was an improvised sort of calming of streets into more permanent measures to calm those streets. Here's a view of Warren Street, what this might look like in Hudson. And here you can see an intersection where the idea is that these barriers would be placed in the street in a way that it would force drivers to slow down, but it wouldn't block cars entirely, so you can still drive into that block. You're encouraged to not, you know, drive more than one block. So if you need to go somewhere else on Warren Street, you drive around. You would still be able to go into that block to drop off your groceries, to pick someone up, to park potentially even. And emergency vehicles can go through, but the idea is really to give pedestrians preference during the times that this is in place. And again, our proposal currently is to start with the time of Friday to Sunday, 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. Here's a top view now of what this would look like. And on the left, you see the view that I showed you earlier. This would be a typical weekday on the left. And then on the right, you see the weekend where the entire space between parking lanes becomes a shared space. You would still be able to park in certain locations that are not taken up by vendors. But the street itself, you just have to drive slowly if you drive in, and primarily the idea is that it's used for pedestrians. We'll talk a little bit more about parking towards the end of this presentation. Here, just I wanted to show a few images of examples of how these barriers could work. It's our goal to be very nimble in a test phase. So what you see on the left is similar to the barriers that the DPW has now, and we're hoping to just use those and add signage to them for a start. And then over the course of the summer, we might be able to improve this to have barriers that look like the ones in the center, planters on rolls that can be moved into the street, but also could be easily moved away in case an emergency vehicle needs to go through. And then on the very right, you see an idea that has sprung up in Berlin in recent weeks as a response to the pandemic, where residents actually found it much easier to, and the city found it much easier to use volunteers. And many volunteers were eager to help to sort of stand at the corner and direct traffic into other directions, explain to drivers why the street is blocked off and where the nearest parking space might be. And we think that this is also something that, at least during sort of crucial times during the weekend, that might be useful and helpful in Hudson, where someone could, hand out a little brochure that points to the larger parking lots in the city so that people know where to go instead of parking on Warren Street. And then here's an image of the third strategy that talks about these public areas. So this is, which you probably all recognize the site. It's on 5th and Warren. And the idea is really here that this increases the space that can be occupied in the summer, allows for some picnic tables where you could sit down and eat the takeout food that you got from a restaurant around the corner, that you got from the food truck, or that you brought from home, and participate in this sort of reopening and recovery of Hudson. And here's a plan view to just see how many tables with ample distance between the tables could fit on the lot. And the idea is also that these are spaces where we could place some public restrooms, because one concern that we heard often is that, especially the summers, the types of restrooms that are usually being used by the public in restaurants and stores might not be available because of physical distance limitations. I want to get to, here's a timeline. We are now in this, what we're hoping is one more week to continue to share this presentation, get feedback and input, adjust the ideas, develop a permitting process. So we've been working with the city departments on that, also developing a budget for and finding funding for some of the items that I mentioned, like the barriers, the signage that we would need, that would be placed over the course of the summer. We're hoping to have a trial or / rehearsal weekend, June 19th to 21st. Now that's very close. And I think we're gonna probably, that might mean we could potentially add programming at the waterfront to connect this entire sort of idea of a shared public space program all the way to the water. That would mean that this is then the time where we would improve the physical barriers and signage into something that would be a little bit more sturdy and costly, and continue to encourage businesses and organizations to participate. And this includes also businesses and organizations that may not be on Warren Street right now. But this is really an opportunity for everybody to come together. And we hope that this entire program can then, sort of be a great place for all of Hudson to share its public spaces throughout the summer until the end of October. Here's a little bit of the sort of nuts and bolts of why we landed where we landed. What you're seeing here is, on the one hand, a map that shows traffic counts. And these are from 2016, so they're not the most recent, but also, I think we all know that the last 3 months wouldn't be representative either. And so what this does show, though, is that there's a trend that Warren Street west of 7th has lower traffic than east of 7th, which is why, we would like to start and test this out in this portion of Warren Street, west of 7th. Now that means that businesses, and I think we showed this image earlier, that are east of 7th would still be able to, expand onto the parking spaces. We just wouldn't do the slow street, shared street concept because there is a lot of traffic that comes through Warren Street in that area. You also see on this map the various different parking lots that we hope we can encourage visitors to use instead of the metered parking on Warren Street. And then in pink, you see the existing public transportation. And for that, at least is our current thinking, is the best thing would just be to leave it where it is and live with the fact that for the few times where it would overlap with the shared street concept, the bus would have to drive a little slower through these blocks, but it could still drive slower and pick up passengers along the way. And then here's just a quick summary of reminder of why we think this is important, that many of the small businesses in Hudson are at risk of collapse. They employ Hudson residents and are owned by Hudson residents. It's safer to be outdoors. We all know that, and it's a better place for maintaining physical distance for a whole variety of activities that go well beyond shopping and dining, but that include sort of activities for youth, for playing, for exercise, or just meeting with friends. And then the recent survey by the Hudson Hospitality Task Force also kind of highlighted some of these things that we've been hearing over and over again, that people are more comfortable to be served outside, but that also there's overwhelming support among residents to support local businesses in their recovery. And so that is a big part of why we're putting together this plan, in addition to making it not just about business, but also about all residents to be, find spaces to come together. And that's the end of my presentation. I'm going to stop sharing now, so to open it up for questions.
Thank you, Kaya. So I have a few questions around accessibility. How does the plan impact people with disabilities?
Yeah, that's a good question. And so this maybe just to clarify once again that we actually think there are some improvements to accessibility in the sense that, people in a wheelchair, for instance, could access tables that are outside on the parking without a curb. We also think that the street wouldn't be close to cars entirely. So if you need to go into the street, if you need to go to a business or, an appointment, you can drive into that block. And there will be very likely some parking spaces still available on that block. You can certainly be dropped off. And we think that our testing period will then sort of, evolve closer if we need to respond more directly to ensure that every block has at least, enough available parking spaces so that people could actually also park without, having to be driven to their appointment.
Yeah, I know there's, some people express concern about people with disabilities who maybe live on Orange Street or are going to professional appointments. And this kind of also goes into the next question. How will this plan impact people who use public transportation?
So we still need to sort of confirm this, right, with Columbia County, but we think the easiest way is to just keep the buses where they are. And the traffic, so the buses in a way would be the only through traffic that would be allowed to go through. And so there's really, if you look at the bus schedules with the current proposal, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, it's really the Greenport Hudson shopping shuttle bus that would overlap with this to a certain extent. So it's on Friday and Saturday, 4 buses each that would have to go through Warren Street.
Thank you.
And our proposal is to just let them go through.
How will this affect any deliveries that need to go to Warren Street?
I think we would encourage deliveries to happen before 10 a.m. We would also encourage delivery to use, if they're not before 10 a.m., to use the parallel streets for, until they reach the block where they actually need to go to. But other than that, they can drive in, deliver, drop off what they need to drop off, and then drive back out of the block.
Cars, outdoor businesses, and pedestrians would be close in proximity. Talk about what safety measures are in place and if there's any successful examples that you know
Um, I grew up on a street like this, where cars and children playing shared the space. Well, the most important thing I think is slowing vehicles down. And the way the shared street concept works is that it relies heavily on all participants in the street looking out for each other. So you make eye contact with the driver, you make eye contact with the pedestrian who's in the same space, but really slowing down and being able to react to that eye contact is critical. And it's worked in, so in the spaces that have sprung up, all over the country in the last couple of weeks, it has worked really well.
Is there, what's the plan around emergency service vehicles? Say if they need to access a fire hydrant or, fire truck or EMS need to get to Warren Street?
Like I showed in the image, and so by the way, the presentation will be available on the city's website after this town hall for everyone to go look at the images again. The barriers that would be temporary in place during the times of the shared street, the idea is that they're movable. And so for a fire truck that might be a little wider than the regular car, you might have to move one barrier aside to rush the fire truck through. We also envision that the regulations around fire hydrants would remain to be in place. So, the spaces of fire hydrants wouldn't be occupied by businesses or organizations.
I have a question from a business owner. They said, so are they responsible for installing barriers?
Yeah, for barriers to keep their customers safe within that parking space. So that could be planters, that could be stanchions, depending on what the layout of that space is. Business owners will have their own ideas of how substantial that would be. Yeah, but the idea is that they're responsible and also, can let their creativity flow and how they want to occupy that space and make it safe for their customers to do so.
Thank you. So in a lot of events that happen where we close down Warren Street, one business owner had a concern that the bottom half of Warren Street are not usually, included in that cutoff. So is it going to be all of the businesses on Warren Street from 7th all the way down to front?
And more, right? I don't know. Does anyone, Sage, Tammy, do you also want to answer some of these questions? Yes, the goal is really to not only have the shared street idea go all the way from Front Street to 7th, but that the idea of being able to occupy a parking space in front of your property or business can go even beyond that space. And we were referring the other day in a meeting to it's the same, similar to getting a dumpster in front of your business, that you could do that in other places too. And so that includes businesses that aren't even on Warren Street. However, we also want to allow those businesses to collaborate with properties on Warren Street to have a presence there if they would like to.
You gave me a great segue to one of the questions, would be trash pickup, and what would the responsibility be around outside dining and garbage pickup?
Sage, Tammy, do you want to jump in?
I'll jump in. We have been in consultation with many of the businesses on Warren Street. We hope to talk with those of you who we haven't talked to directly yet. But they feel confident that they can handle the trash generated, especially by their location on site. They're well equipped to do this and would continue to do this. We've also spoken with the DPW, and they do have weekend trash collection that will probably need to be stepped up a bit, but they did not feel like it would be a large impact on what they're already doing. They feel confident that everyone feels pretty confident that we can do this.
Thank you. The next question is, there are approximately 180 businesses on Warren Street. Have they been polled on this? And if so, are they supportive?
I guess I'll jump in here again. We've spoken to, as we've had so many meetings the last 2 weeks, but we have not been able to reach out to every single business. We're very happy to hear from everyone. We have had one-on-one meetings, group meetings. We've been working through the HBCI and other entities to try to reach out and get input from people across the business sector and the nonprofit sector to get input in this plan. So we've had a lot of voices at the table, but not everybody.
What other Hudson Valley cities attempted this in the past? And if so, what have you learned about their experience?
Peter, do you want to speak to what you've read about Catskill and Kingston?
Yeah, so Kingston has recently started an open streets initiative which uses and applies some of the same strategies that our proposal has. Catskill is currently in discussions about changing the traffic and parking situation on their main street. And yeah, I mean, I guess the way I think about this question is that we're sort of, that we're in new territory, and the models for how cities respond are pretty broad. And Kaya showed a lot of examples from Portland and from Oakland, and we join a growing number of cities in being creative about street space to keep people safe.
One of our team members actually lives currently in Greenport on Long Island, and they've already had a trial weekend. And so we've been also able to learn a little bit on how they rolled out a similar plan, or did a trial weekend very light, just people bringing sort of folding tables out onto the street to then wait how that goes before larger investments are made.
Great. What is the estimated cost to pull this off? And what is the source of those funds?
That's a very good question. So we're working on a budget, and we have some ideas for funding, but that's also part of what we're hoping to finalize in the next week or so.
Great. Is there anywhere that people can look when this information becomes available? I know we'll have some stuff on the website, but is there anything that you guys have as a collective?
I would say that the cityofhudson.org/streets is kind of, I think, will be the home for this. There currently is a link to a few questions, like a survey, to sort of get some input from people. Beyond that, I'm not sure. I think that's meant to be the home for what we're doing.
What are the plans for signage and entering and driving through the city?
All this stuff is very open, and it's moving. But we've discussed certainly extending, creating signage, making it look very much like what Kaya had presented, and included it in the budget as a way of helping people practice safe physical distancing, but also navigate the streets and find parking and find all the resources and amenities that will be available. So that's built into the way that we're envisioning.
How many parking spaces does each business get?
Right now, the system that's been identified by the city that is the fastest and simplest way to do this is to utilize a permitting process that allows you to identify a specific parking space that's adjacent or contiguous to your business and apply for the permit for that. So if your business stretches over 2 or 3 parking spaces, it is possible that you could apply for more than 1 parking space. Some of the smaller businesses are going to be somewhat limited. It is acknowledged that parking spaces do not always align exactly with businesses or a building's footprint. So I think, as Peter said before, we're in entirely new territory in this pandemic situation, and it's going to be it's going to require we all work together and be fair and equitable. And so if your business shares the frontage of a parking space with another business, we're going to have to work together to navigate that. And I think we can do it, but again, everyone's going to really have to pull together to make this work.
Speaking of parking spaces, what is the application for someone to apply for the private rights to a parking space?
Right, we haven't completely finalized that yet. We have been working with the city attorneys to come up with a very, hopefully, fair application process. Again, right now, what's available is contiguous to your physical space, but we're looking at city-owned properties, nonprofit-owned properties, and other perhaps residents who might be willing to have some of the space in front of their building be occupied to allow small businesses who are not on Warren Street and community groups to come onto the street and participate in this program. And that, again, we're working out the specifics on that, but that's very much the plan.
Another about parking. What about resident parking on Warren Street?
Parking spaces that are not taken up by businesses right now, at least as we try to test this out, would remain parking spaces. We're also looking to activate as many of the larger lots that are nearby that aren't always activated in a full way as they can. But it is true that this plan will disrupt a number of parking spaces on Warren Street. So there's no way around that. It will.
How does this project impact people outside of Warren Street for, say, parking overflow? Do businesses on Warren Street have access to a similar benefit?
So as Sage just said, we're hoping to encourage as many people as possible to use the larger parking lots. And so this will be part of a signage rollout or potentially a handout to kind of direct people to these parking lots to minimize the impact on the side streets that people are kind of circling around to find an on-street parking spot there. That's been, anecdotally, we've heard that that's already been the practice of some of the businesses, that they would direct their customers to the larger lots.
Switching it up a little bit, are there any emergency plans, including COVID?
Yes, there's been a lot of conversation about public hand sanitation stations, public hand washing stations, possibly public restroom facilities that of course would be a sanitation challenge, but there's a general consensus that there isn't enough access to restrooms in the greater area where we're looking at. So whether those can be added, we're very interested in working with local resources and in making sure that people have access to what they need.
We also had a meeting with Jack Mobb this morning of the Columbia County Department of Health to present the plan to him and make sure it had his support and get his input. And he was very supportive of the plan and feels that creating space outside for people to socially distance and for businesses to expand is by far the safest way to go.
What's needed from the city to make this successful? Is there going to be any policing, or is DPW responsible to set up and take down the project?
We've had very constructive meetings with all departments across the city who have felt like the plan, especially in this initial testing stage, was very doable with current staffing levels, and that they could support the plan as we rolled out some test weekends and try to navigate the best way to do it. But we are looking at ways to cover the cost of these larger, say, planters that block the intersections and some of the other infrastructure, the signage that would have costs that would not come directly out of the current city budget.
Thank you. During these test runs, what are the deliverables that you guys look to achieve? Like, how are you measuring if it's successful or not?
So I think there are a number of things that we're looking towards. One is, of course, sort of direct feedback from businesses, their customers, and residents overall. And we can do that via survey right after a trial weekend, in addition to kind of verbal one-on-one conversations and continuing what we've been doing to meet with as many people as possible. The other is traffic counts, and we're looking for volunteers. You don't have to be a professional traffic counter. It's really easy, but we want to know how this affects traffic and whether or not there's sort of visible or congestion felt in the parallel streets to Warren streets, whether there's any sort of problem with parking. So that we have some measurable data from that first weekend to evaluate whether it works in all of the areas that we envision, or whether the plan has to be adjusted in any form.
How will this project affect city revenue?
We're hoping, we met with Heather Campbell to again brief her and for her to consider the financial aspect to this plan. And we're hoping very much that this will help the city budget by helping businesses to survive and continue to operate and pay sales tax and lodging tax, and also retain jobs and generate employment. So the goal is to help Hudson's recovery and not be a burden on the city.
Great, thank you. Another question from a business owner on Warren Street. How far will the space expand? If it does not stretch the entire length of Warren Street, how can we make it so that bars, restaurants, and retail stores outside of the designated areas are able to benefit from this plan? It seems likely that the places that directly adjacent to the proposed area will benefit the most.
That's possible, and I think one thing that we, I guess, haven't been able to visualize really well is that we envision that businesses that aren't in the area between Front Street and 7 will also be able to, bring out tables and, occupy these parking spaces. And we also think that after a trial weekend, we can certainly sort of talk about whether it seems feasible to even expand the shared street aspect beyond 7th or in potentially even other areas in the city. We can't randomly sort of start, placing barriers everywhere in the city. So I think we all should see this as a first step in, getting our feet wet and understanding what impact that has. And then over the course of the summer, I think we all just need to be open to suggestions of how this idea can be adjusted to accommodate everybody as best as possible without creating enormous burden on other participants of traffic or residents that use these streets for other purposes than shopping or dining.
This is I guess, suggestion / question. It would be helpful to restate the advantage of shared streets versus closed streets, and why the plan proposes a shared street model.
I think the number of questions we got about parking and deliveries and accessibility speak to those reasons. And we did look at so many different variations on the plan and came to the conclusion that some vehicular traffic and parking was essential.
And
How
also,
oh, go ahead, Kai.
I just wanted to add to this also that I think we need to remind ourselves that we're doing this at an enormous speed. And as a community to sort of really figure out which blocks you could close to traffic entirely would take a lot longer and more studying. So this seems a more feasible idea to implement in a short term.
How can we communicate parking options to the public?
Similar to the way that we manage Winterwalk, parking and traffic and the new street plans will become a part of our communications plan, and we will certainly have it on our website and develop print materials and signage. And we would also encourage other organizations to share the information and have it on the city website, and try and make it a very easy thing for people to plan their visit ahead of time.
Great. I want to add, we also got a ton of just comments of people that are excited about the project. I couldn't ask those in a question form, but we did get a bunch of those, so I want to make sure that I add that. Is there anyone on the panel that wants to add anything that maybe was left out or wasn't asked that you feel is important?
I'd like to say that if there's any constituent group or business or resident or community group that would like a one-on-one briefing, we'd be happy to set up a Zoom call so that we can talk about your specific concerns, needs, or even ideas. A lot of the ideas that have come out of these briefings, and they've been really exciting and helpful.
So what's next? What's the next step for people to look for? If you want to remind everybody listening on social media and on YouTube.
I think we'd like the public to provide feedback, and then Mayor, I think we'll need your approval.
Great. I want to thank, the entire panel for, this initiative. It's exciting for Hudson, in my opinion. I'm going to listen to what the residents think, but I think, you all did a great job in kind of outlining what to expect. So I want to give you a chance if anybody else has any last things to say before we say goodbye.
No, I just want to say thank you, Mr. Mayor, and everybody that I've spoken to about this. It's just been a real joy to work on something that feels like it really could benefit the community. So thank you all.
Thank you. And our listeners on WGXC. I just got scolded about that. So thank you to our listeners listening over the radio. So there'll be more information on the city website and, all our social media, and we'll keep everyone, fully aware of what's going on. So I want to thank, everybody once again for your expertise and your time on this project. And until next time, thank you.
Thank you.